G'day, welcome to Down in the Woodworks. Today's video is part one in what will probably be a two-part series of how I upgraded our existing dining table. It's a table that I made about 20 years ago, so it was due for a bit of an upgrade. In this video, I'm going to be building a new set of legs for it. Before we get into the build, I'll show a grab of an earlier video of mine where I actually talk about the old table, so you can see what it looks like before the upgrade. I thought this would be a really good opportunity to have a very quick look at this dining room table of ours. The base of the table is, all the components are made of old timber fence posts. The top of the table, that was actually a gate off the side of a house. I picked it up from a demo yard, and yeah, it's just got so much character, and the timbers on it had dried up so much over the years at these gaps. It was good to have a project where I could use some of my huge supply of reclaimed Australian hardwood. There's a lot of projects in that rack. Once I'd picked out some promising looking boards, I gave them a quick skip plane to get an idea of their colour, and these ones were all pretty similar. Next I trimmed them up and cut them to rough length. I was really impressed with this circular saw. You can hear it struggling a little cutting through these super hard timbers, but I managed to trim all boards with the one battery. So this is what I ended up with. The boards were cut much longer than I needed, and I did that so that once they were all milled up I could have a better look at them and pick out the best sections of each length. These boards were really flat and straight, as you can see here, which was a real bonus because they didn't need a lot of milling, and I wanted to maintain as much thickness as I could. And it also meant less strain and wear and tear on my machines. So all the boards went through the usual milling processes. I have to say, when working with this super tough old hardwood, you need to take things a little slower, but it's definitely worth it. First I flattened one face on the jointer, and then flattened one edge 90 degrees to that face. Then all the boards went through the thicknesser to flatten the second face parallel to the first and to bring them all down to the same thickness. Then on the table saw, with the jointed edge against the fence, I ripped all the boards to their final width of around 90mm. Last step in the process was another pass through the thicknesser on their edge to remove any saw blade marks. After the boards were all milled up, they were then cut the final length using the cross-cut sled on the table saw. At this stage, the ends were all cut at right angles. The legs are going to be a trapezoid shape, and all the ends will be later cut at 5 degrees. The joinery method for the legs was DIY floating tenons. The mortises were cut using the router and a 1/2-inch spiral upcut bit. The mortises in the top and bottom plates or rails were cut in the ends of the pieces using my workbench and the top of the vice jaws as a reference surface. These mortises were plunged straight down into the ends of the pieces. Each joint had 2 floating tenons. After cutting the mortises, I then cut the ends of all the boards at 5 degrees. Or is that 85 degrees? You know what I mean. I've said it before how easy it is to cut angles or miters the wrong way around, so I always mark the direction of the cut. I set up this simple jig nailed to the jaw of my vise, which used the top of the jaws and the bench as the reference surface. The uprights for the legs needed to have their mortises cut at 5 degrees on the inside face at both ends, so they'd line up with the mortises on the top and bottom rails. I clamped an offcut of MDF to my bench to act as a stop, so the mortises were cut at the right distance from the end of each piece. And then it was basically the same process again of plunging straight down with the router to cut the mortises. Now this is where I should have taken my own advice and marked the direction of the mortises on each piece, because I just flipped each board around and cut the mortises at the other end using the same jig, but this ended up with them all cut in the wrong direction. My only solution was to plug the mortises and recut them. I thought about cutting the legs down and redoing them, but that would have affected the height of the table, and I just didn't feel like milling up 4 new boards. I let the plugs fully set for a day and then made another simple jig to cut the mortises in the right direction this time, and it actually worked out really well. Luckily none of the joinery is seen when the legs are assembled. Anyone who's worked with old Aussie hardwood knows how sharp and brittle the surface grain can be, so I sealed the grain with a thinned out mix of oil-based clear varnish and terps. Once that had dried, I sanded most of the finish off, leaving only what had soaked into the grain. To assemble the legs together, I was thinking about how to easily clamp them, considering the 5-degree angle of the sides. We all know how stressful glue-ups can be. What I decided to do was nail some timbers to my bench top at the right angle to act as a clamping guide, which worked out really well. Time to finally get these legs together. As you can see, when I cut those mortises, I had my router set to the loose setting, which made for a stress-free glue-up. The tenons were made by cutting strips of oak to the appropriate size and rounding over the edges on the router table. I'll leave a link below to a video where you can see how I make them. I used some F-clamps to hold the leg against the gluing guides, which held everything nicely in position while the glue dried. And here's a close-up of the leg assembly clamped to those strips on my bench top. These legs were way heavier than they look, thanks to this old hardwood being so dense. Very happy with how they turned out. I gave the legs a real good sanding up to 180 grit with the orbital sander, and then finished them off by hand sanding with the grain to get rid of any swirl marks. Last thing to do was to drill the holes for the mounting screws. To allow for movement, I drilled a shallow recess with a 25mm Forstner bit for the head of the screws, which were 15mm diameter. And then drilled an 8mm hole all the way through for the screws, which were 6mm diameter. Well, the legs are looking great, and I think they're going to be a real modern upgrade for this table. The second video will be the actual tabletop and the upgrades that I do to that, so make sure you look out for that video. If you don't want to miss out on seeing that video, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. If you want to know what I'm up to in between videos, as always, you can follow me on Instagram. But until the next one, you guys all have a great day.